This is Russia, the big bad villain, or just a dude trying to resist a bigger bully, depending on your perspective. Russia has been fighting in Ukraine for the past 10 years. Why? The short answer is to make Ukraine a buffer state meat shield against NATO. But why such contempt between both East Slavic nations? Well, it kinda traces back to the origins of Russians and Ukrainians, a bunch of East Slavic speaking people doing their own pagan things. Then, the Vikings got bored and raided everyone. Some Vikings settled in Eastern Europe, forming the Kievan Rus, either the epitome of Germanic supremacy over Slavs, or Slavic integration of Germanic settlers, depending on your perspective. The Kievan Rus dudes are the OG of modern-day Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, and they imported lots of religious, cultural, and writing stuff from the Byzantines. Later, the Mongols came along and beat up everyone. This is where the historical and national identity of Ukraine and Russia diverged. The Grand Duchy of Moscow rose up, and beat up the Mongol remnant Tatars. To protect itself against future random nomads' attack from the east and random religious European dudes from the west, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, later Russia, went all out to expand on all fronts, even overachieving by stepping into Alaska. Meanwhile, Poland and Lithuania became big bullies, gobbling up the Kievan Rus remnants' lands. These East Slavic Kievan Rus remnants in Polish-Lithuanian lands were known as Ruthenians, arguably the ancestor of modern-day Ukrainians. Later, some Cossacks in Zaporizhia, basically East Slavic-speaking cowboys in the Pontic steppe, rebelled against Poland. To protect itself against Poland, these Cossacks and Russia signed the Pereyaslav Agreement, whereby the Cossacks swore allegiance to Russia. Poland was not happy, so Russia beat up Poland, gaining chunks of modern-day Ukraine. As the Russian Empire continued to expand into Europe, more Ruthenian and Cossack lands were occupied/liberated by Russia. The fate of modern-day Russia and Ukraine became intertwined again. The vast flatlands between the Russian Empire and the rest of Europe were strategic meat shields, just ask Sweden and France. The Russian Empire considered Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians as basically the same East Slavic Eastern Orthodox Cyrillic writing people with a dialect continuum. To foster Russification and national unity, the Ukrainian language/dialect was banned in the 19th century. If you are wondering what is the difference between Russian and Ukrainian language/dialect, one has more Old Church Slavonic, English, and French influence, whilst the other has more Polish influence. The Ukrainian unique identity managed to survive despite the Russification efforts, mainly thanks to these dudes. So why did some Ukrainians resist against becoming like the glorious top dog Russians? Well, this is because some Ukrainians reckon that its unique identity lies as the freed people roaming on the river banks and wild fields, embracing the influence from Poland and Roman Catholics, rather than being bossed around by Kremlin. During World War I, Communist Russia gave up chunks of Eastern Europe in exchange for peace. The lands in modern-day Ukraine became independent, for a short while. Ukraine and Russia were part of the founding members of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union wanted to industrialize quickly, so it enforced central grain collectivism and exports even in the midst of famine, causing lots of death particularly in the grain-producing regions of Ukraine. A classic debate of ends justifying the means. During World War II, Nazi Germany, probably did not read the manual, invaded the Soviet Union. Bad mistake, the Germans got driven back. The German invasion of Russia demonstrated the importance of having adequate meat shield against fanatical European expansionists, and thus it is no surprise that the Soviet Union's sphere of influence extended into Central Europe after the war. During the Soviet era, Russia gave Ukraine the Crimean Peninsula to celebrate the 300 years anniversary of the Pereyaslav Agreement. All good vibes, no drama, because these two republics are essentially in the same country. As part of the Soviet Union, both Russia and Ukraine were the top dogs in economy, science, and military technology. After the fall of Soviet Union, both Russia and Ukraine became independent countries, and their economies spiraled downwards. Ukraine removed its remnant nuclear warheads, in exchange for a promise of security. Ukraine also agreed to lease the port of Sevastopol to the Russian Navy. Russia eventually picked itself up again, becoming a key energy supplier to Ukraine and the rest of Europe, regaining its geopolitical muscles. Meanwhile, Ukraine's economy is still in shambles, and thus Ukraine inched closer towards European Union and NATO for money and security. The United States supported Ukraine's bid to join NATO, which annoyed Russia. From Russia's point of view, having NATO nuclear bombs in Ukraine within Russia borders is a nightmare. Thus, Russia need to have a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine. From Ukraine's point of view, it has all the rights to chart its own path in global geopolitics. Ukraine tried leaning towards the West from time to time, Russia countered offered with sweet deals, Ukraine changed its mind, the Ukrainian people went crazy, leading to a liberation/coup. It is noted that Ukraine itself has already been kinda bipolar due to historical and ethnicity background. Southeastern Ukraine has more ethnic Russians and they are generally sympathetic to Russia, bits of it which got annexed/liberated by Russia. United States and its allies slapped Russia with huge economic sanctions as a punishment. After some more dramas, Russia invaded/conducted military operations in Ukraine. It was not a quick victory as envisioned by Russia, because Ukraine has lots of foreign support. It became a relative stalemate, because both sides do not want to lose Ukraine, but are not keen to use the big bombs. Thus Ukraine is now an international playground. The victims were of course the civilians, who left Ukraine as refugees, exacerbating Ukraine population decline. From the nationalistic Russians' point of view, Ukraine is an artificial country created by the historical borderlands between Austria, Poland, Turks, and Russia. Russian nations must unite to protect against European expansionists. From nationalistic Ukrainians' point of view, the historical Polish and Austrian influence on its East Slavic roots has shaped its own unique national identity, therefore anti-Russian sentiments are definitely justified. If you are a huge fan of the United States, then Russia is definitely the aggressor bad guy who must be defeated. The Russian economic sanctions are definitely effective, Ukraine soldiers are the good heroes beating up the bad guy Russians like a punching bag, and this Zelensky dude is the coolest dude in the world. If you are a huge fan of Russia, then it is no-brainer for Ukraine to be aligned with Russia again. Long live Russia as a counterbalance in the multipolar world. Putin is the smartest and most pragmatic statesman ever, United States and its puppets are the aggressors who are blockading Russia, and all the sufferings initiated by Russia in Ukraine are justifiable to achieve the ultimate end results. If you are an aspiring human rights activist, you can definitely start by sharing opinions, news, or even your own pictures, to show how great of a human being that you are, which will definitely be an effective inspiration and support to the actual ground troops and humanitarian workers. If you are just a regular desperate simp, you probably would not really care as long as there is ample supply of beautiful mail-ordered brides from both Russia and Ukraine. So what is next? For Russia, it really just has to hang on, focus on improving its economy, make the occupied areas better than Ukraine, and hope that one day the United States will give up on burning cash in Ukraine. For Ukraine, it is a bit too late to be neutral and play both sides. So now it just has to hold on. Bleed out Russian cash as much as possible, focus on getting continuous support from United States and its allies, reminding them this is all for the greater good of democracy and freedom, and more importantly, ensuring their attention and hype are not being distracted by other conflicts. For the United Nations, it just has to continue to pretend that it is effective in solving proxy wars. Good luck. Thanks for watching.